Greetings, folks, and welcome back to Congressional Musical Chairs. Here in the unending states of argument, a handful of states and cities are holding elections today, the most high-profile of these taking place in New Jersey, Virginia, and New York City. Now, as you can probably tell by the video's title and thumbnail, and description if you're one of the cool kids that reads those in advance, this isn't going to be a sermon on how you ought to do your civic duty and vote for this candidate because some dumbass who hasn't anything to vote for this year told you so. Instead, I played 2 installments of a decently well-known election simulator series and decided to compare the two in a battle of bites. I mean, this channel was originally set up to be a showcase of all the Steam games and whatnot that I play, not just Toy 4. Why not finally shine a light on something else after 5 years of beating the same dead horse? In today's video, I'm going to be comparing the Political Machine 2020 and the Political Machine 2024, the latest 2 installments of the eponymous game series. For those who are unaware, in Political Machine games, or POLMAC for brevity's sake, you play as either the Democratic or Republican nominee for president in the corresponding election year, campaigning up and down the country against the opposing party's nominee, who you also get to choose. This series has been running consistently since 2004, and it has a plethora of different candidates to choose, from the actual nominees and running mates to the runner-ups in the primaries to major political figures of then and before, including many former presidents and unsuccessful nominees. And if you don't fancy playing as any of those, you can create your own candidate to slug it out against the nation's finest and funkiest alike. Now, sure, all of these games operate similar ways, but there are some major differences between titles, from gameplay mechanics to aesthetics. So, with that said, let's have a see-look at 2020 and 2024 from an overhead perspective, pointing out obvious features before diving into each game's specifics on its own. To unleash the full potential of your candidate's campaign in this series, there are a number of consistently available options at your disposal. Candidates can give speeches in the state they're standing on, either endorsing or rejecting a certain position or topic, or arguing their opponent holds supportive or antagonistic views of said topic or position. These speeches will affect your standing with Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike, and they'll often boost your issue stance. Certain states value certain issues over others, and states you spend a lot of time in trying to court will begin to glow a brighter color, indicating high enthusiasm for one or both candidates. Increased enthusiasm for you can increase your chances of carrying that state on election day, and if you're ever strapped for cash, these states will fork up the most. To increase your influence in states, even when you're on the other side of the country, you can also construct campaign headquarters and run advertisements, which effectively act as a repeating speech for a few weeks. At 10 weeks into your game, you're prompted to choose a running mate from the ranks of your party, and it can be anyone, even those from the same state or those who've previously served as president. These running mates will also fly around the country, trying to boost your support wherever they go. Over the duration of the campaign, various events will occur, giving you either a setback or perhaps a choice of benefits. And if you wish to fork up the dough, you can hire advisors and demagogues to either boost your support or damage your opponents. But all of it culminates on election day, when the states vote for either you or your opponent. Like the actual Electoral College, it takes 270 electoral votes to win the White House. On the topic of candidate customization, you have a lot to tinker with. Or so if you have the DLCs. You can set their attributes, which affects things like their initial campaign funds, energy in a given week, and issue stances, and set a few policy positions. Note that unless you want to rig your candidates to always win, you're limited in how much you can modify these stances and attributes. However, there are no limits on the customization of their bobblehead. With enough precision, you can create a splitting image of an actual person, or you can create a Cronenberg horror that resides in the uncanny valley. But before I start sounding like an advertisement, let's get into the specifics for these 2 games. I wouldn't have much to compare if I kept on rambling now, would I? Anyways, I figured the best way to compare the 2 games was to run the same 2 candidates against each other. So, I decided to run 2 games between Democratic ex-President Joe Biden and Republican President Donald Trump, since both were, at least for a time, the default choices for the party nominations in each of the games. I wouldn't make any changes to settings: normal difficulty, normal number of events, normal campaign period, normal normality. But that left one question unanswered. Who was I going to play as? Alrighty, so I'm going to make this quick. I have a spinner wheel right here with 2 candidates, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I'm going to spin this wheel, and that will determine the candidate I play as for both runs of the game. Make sure, equal candidates, equal opportunity, and, fair grading systems. So we're just going to spin the wheel right here and see which former/current president are we getting. Okay, so we will be playing both games as Joe Biden. The first thing you'll notice when you launch the Political Machine 2020 is a comparatively darker exterior when compared to its three predecessors. The bobbleheads and states, even the enthusiastic or contested ones, have more faded colors. Speaking of the bobbleheads, they make a stark departure from the style used from 2008 to 2016. The faces are still relatively simple in design, though they're a bit rougher and deeper in appearance than before. The heads themselves are also taller, generally, and their facial expressions are more realistic. In short, they're a lot more appealing, at least to me, to have to look at for the whole of the game. While we're in the realm of the candidates, this game features two joke ideologies, giant meteorism and lunacy. These candidates, unless you run them against each other, will almost never win, and it's pretty much a guaranteed landslide for whoever their opponent is. 2020 is so far the first and only game in the series to have meme candidates included on the roster. Getting into the game itself, alongside the event opportunities that spawn in random states, there are also town hall opportunities that pop up in random states. Holding these town halls will grant you a number of ideology points, which brings me to the next unique feature in this game, the ideology trees. Eerily similar to the focus trees from that other game I like talking about, ideology trees provide you with a number of political issues you can bring to light. These boost the awareness and impacts of your stance on the issue in question, and they often generate national enthusiasm for one or both candidates. By making more niche issues more central to the election campaign, you can improve your swaying power on undecideds and wary voters alike. Another way to get ideology points is to accept interview invitations. While this feature is present in the Political Machine 2016 as well, it's here and not in 2024, so I'm gonna gab about it. There are 4 possible interview opportunities, each with different question topics and ideological leans. While poor performance during these interviews isn't a death sentence for your campaign, it does help to answer honestly and as non-controversially as you can. And, as an added funny, all 4 of these interview shows are parodies of various TV shows, news programs, or podcasts. Quick side note, since I couldn't figure out how to show this into the script, I chose Kamala Harris as my running mate both times. Trump's AI did not choose Mike Pence or JD Vance, however. As for my playthrough of the game, I kept things as cool as possible. I strayed away from the campaign stances that gave Trump any kind of boosts, and I didn't hire very many operatives. Giving speeches was enough to sway certain states. When election day came, I won on a blowout, 465 electoral votes to Trump's 73, the largest presidential landslide since 1984. The popular vote matched this as well, as I outran the president by about 30 million votes. And surely the polling indicated something like this, right? Well, mostly. Just like political polling in the real world, the polling in the political machine isn't 100% accurate, and it is liable to completely misrepresent the public's feelings on the candidates. Having gone through all the state polls immediately prior to the election and comparing them to the final vote results, the polling was mostly reflective of the final results. Only 2 states were missed completely. In both states, Biden led Trump by a tilt margin, or a margin of under 1%, in the final polls, but Trump went on to win both by a tilt margin of his own. 3 states overestimated Biden's lead by 1 polling tier, meaning they had him leading Trump with too wide a margin. 4 states underestimated their winner's lead, inaccurately portraying the race there as closer than it actually was. But in the grand scheme of things, only 4% of the polling could be considered a true polling miss, referring to the states where Biden was polling ahead but Trump won them in the end. Even in those 7 states where the winner's lead was overinflated or understated, they still won them. A win is a win, no matter how big the margin is. And some of these misses could perhaps be attributed to high numbers of undecided voters and generally low enthusiasm in those states, as some of the closest states were so unenthusiastic they lacked any color at the end of the campaign. So, one could conclude that enthusiasm isn't the end-all be-all for indicating candidate leads, since enthusiasm was low in both very safe states and to-the-wire states. Got all that? I hope so. To summarize, 2020's polls are more accurate, and enthusiasm is an unreliable indicator of a state's final vote margins. And the game features interviews, ideology trees, and irreverent humor-ridden candidacies. Having sufficiently rambled about 2020, we can now move on to the Political Machine 2024. Compared to her elder sister, 2024 is brighter visually, with a more saturated color scheme for the states and such. The bobbleheads are generally more expressive, many of them striking poses as well. Though the faces of the elderly candidates aren't as rough as 2020's, there's more subtle details, such as forehead wrinkles or defined hair direction, if that makes any sense. And where 2020's bobbleheads are taller and therefore narrower, 2024's are shorter and wider. While 2008 had alternative game modes set in other locations, most of the Political Machine games have relied on the general election alone, simply assuming your candidate of choice is the nominee for that particular party. In the Political Machine 2024, you can back up that assumption with funny numbers and game-given evidence, as there's another game mode, the presidential primary. In this game mode, you play as your candidate of choice and take on up to 3 candidates within your party in order to secure the nomination for the general election. Secure the most state delegates in this mode, and you win your party's nomination. If you so desire, you can even continue to the regular campaign campaign against the opposing party as that same candidate. But to ensure a fair comparison, this game mode will have no effect on 2024 standings. Only the general election campaign matters here. And for this, your means for getting your brand out there are different. Sure, the basic options are still around, but ideology trees and television interviews are gone. Instead, you press campaign issues and your stances on them through speeches and advertisements, while trying to stymie your opponent's campaign or boost your own through playing a deck of cards. These cards are granted at a rate of 1 per week, and can have effects across the nation or in specific states. Demagogues and advisors are also woven into this system, as you hire them by placing the proper card in your state of choice. Ideology points have been rebranded into political capital, granted by playing certain cards or getting the right events. Political capital can be spent either on playing a card or on winning certain groups' endorsements, which will grant you a boost to your national enthusiasm and shut your opponent out from winning the same group's favor. Events, though less frequent than before, will pop up whether you want them to or not. You don't need to fly to a random state for it. Since 1976, every American presidential election has had at least 2 debates between the major candidates, and this is another feature unique to the political machine 2024. These are kind of the spiritual successor to the interviews, where one candidate is asked a question and given a chance to respond as they please. Then the other candidate is forced to either take a passionate stance for or against the question topic, or use the question to go after their opponent. Both candidates' responses have the ability to affect the audience's feelings towards either of you, and you really want to be the more favorable of the two of the audience's eyes, as they receive an enthusiasm boost after the debate concludes. Bah, I hear you say. What's all this poppycock about the 2 candidates? American presidential elections never have 2 options only. To this, I say you're absolutely correct. And while no political machine game has allowed you to play as anything other than a Republican or a Democrat, there have been times in which candidates with an independent ideology can be run by both parties. However, this is often limited to someone like George Washington, as was the case with the Founding Fathers DLC for 2020. However, 2024 has a few more independents to choose from, including more contemporary ones like Ross Perot or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So, if that's your jam, you can definitely pit 2 independents against each other. Or you can just run Jill Stein as a Republican because common sense is dead and you helped kill it. But anyways, focusing on my campaign for re-election, I worked to rile up the masses in the critical states, feeding on enthusiasm to put them well out of reach for Trump and Chris Christie. However, just like the actual Biden, I had a much less favorable environment, a piss-poor record to defend, enough health issues to make JFK blush, and a double disaster at the debates. Though I won a second term, it was by a much more uncomfortable margin, 302 electoral votes to Trump's 236. Despite that, Trump still managed to break the Republicans' 20-year losing streak in the popular vote, whooping me 96 million to 86. The polling before this election was a lot screwier this time, however. While it only mispredicted a single state this time, it erroneously had Biden up by a lean margin. Trump managed to swing the Wolverine state several points rightward, carrying it with a lean margin in his favor, and a whopping 14 states had misleading leads. Pennsylvania overestimated Biden's lead by a tier, South Carolina underestimated Trump's lead by a tier, and 12 other states, from blue states to swing states, underestimated Biden's lead by a tier. So sure, only 2% of the states could be considered as having had a polling miss, but having a state like Connecticut, which even Harris won by almost 15 points, within 10 is something worth scratching your head at. And when chalking these numbers up to the enthusiasm numbers to look for a correlation, things get even screwier. Firstly, enthusiasm and polling numbers were listed separately during the game, and states with less enthusiasm often led to crippling landslides, with margins running from 20 to even 50 points. Meanwhile, states with high enthusiasm were a lot harder to sway, and they generally ended up being more accurate. For instance, the polling in Florida was spot on. Biden was up 52 to 48 before Election Day, and he won the Sunshine State by that exact same margin. Alright, that's enough of funky numbers, presidential debates, and playing cards. Let's weigh these 2 games against each other and see which one's got it and which one's got it more. Before I answer the ultimate question of which game is better, let's see which game triumphs in certain aspects. I'll begin with the visuals, and for this, I have to side with PolMac 2024. Now, both games have their strengths and weaknesses. Some bobbleheads look just a bit too off-putting or goofy in both games, for instance, but I prefer the less gritty aesthetic of 2024. Referring back to the bobbleheads, since that was the main determinant in my decision for this aspect, I find the bobbleheads are more resemblant of the people they're trying to depict. The poses definitely help as well, helping them appear a bit more laid back back and much friendlier than their real-life counterparts. And that's why we play these games, to eschew the nastiness of modern politics and run election simulations that put us in the driver's seat. But enough of that horse shit. Let's get back to the cold, hard data. Polling accuracy and the reliability of enthusiasm, a direct result of the efforts of you or your opponent, holds some tangible weight in determining which game is better, at least for me. And frankly, 2024's numbers don't make much sense, so 2020 snags the win for numerical accuracy. Though my 2020 game incorrectly predicted more states than 2024, there are fewer instances in which the polling misrepresented Biden's or Trump's leads, and in the states where this did occur, a lot of them were states that traditionally didn't vote so strongly for Democratic candidates, so a sudden rightward shift wasn't a major surprise. As for 2024, it had Michigan's polling outside your average margin of error, and yet it still swung up to 10 points to the right in the end. That's not a mistake any serious pollster would dare make if they couldn't take the public ridicule. And over 30% of the electoral entities in the election had misrepresentative polls, most of which underestimated Biden's lead going into it. To be spot on in Florida and off by several points in states both close and comfortable is nothing short of confusing. And I already talked about the confusing leaps and bounds relating to voter enthusiasm, so I won't say any more about it. Though I will give both games credit for only misrepresenting leads by a single polling tier. And hell, maybe I'm wrong on a lot of this. I could be having a serious dumbass moment. Or maybe I'm just bad at PollMac 2024. Or both. On that note, let's take a look at each game's difficulty, and I'll decide which game is better in this aspect later, since both games best the other depending on the length through which you look at difficulty. For instance, PollMac 2020 is without a shadow of a doubt the easier of the two games. The easiest way to win is just to grind for ideology points, then spam as much of your ideology tree as possible to surge your enthusiasm. As long as you don't pick any of the ones that give Trump any kind of boosts, or pick them very sparingly, enthusiasm will generally swing so far in your direction that it basically just becomes a one-horse race. In those states I wanted to win solely to inflate my damaged ego, I just hired a few operatives to cancel out whatever advantages Trump and crew had there. Poor bastard didn't stand a chance. Meanwhile, PollMac 2024 is the more challenging of the two. Unless you're playing against a fringe candidate or, an objective fruitcake, victory is not a surefire guarantee, or even necessarily the most likely outcome. There isn't any kind of mana you can stack up with little toil, and it's not like it would help you anyways, because there's no enthusiasm button for you to mash until your opponent blows his brains out on national television. The perks that do exist here, playing more beneficial cards, winning endorsements and the like, are much more mutually exclusive. You either have to settle for a lot of cheap sauce iterations or laser in on one category of perks to spend your precious money and or political capital on. And as for the debates, I find that they're unfairly favored for your opponent no matter what. I very rarely get to answer a question first, which would allow me to pick a more cautious answer, and I'm often forced into trying to one-up something the crowd already likes. And for those times where Trump's AI picked something that gave me an opening to woo some of the audience, he ended up improving on his answers in the second debate. So yeah, 2024 is a hard fight, but it is much more challenging, and you do have to put up the best of your dukes if you want to stand a chance in hell at winning. So, which game's difficulty is more of a positive? Well, I do enjoy both the engaging challenges of 2024 and the much easier gameplay loop of 2020 at different times, but if you want a game with a better gameplay loop, I have to give it to PollMac 2024. I very much like 2020 for its simplicity, but I feel 2024 is something you could come back to and try to master more. And so, with all this considered, the game I prefer overall is The Political Machine 2024. Though its numbers are ludicrous as all get out, they're not always far-fetched. Sometimes they're spot on. And I like that the actual polling numbers and enthusiasm values are marked separately on state interfaces. And while I still very much enjoy PollMac 2020, it's simply been outdone by the next installment in this game series. There's no saying 2024 will be able to hold itself up against the hypothetical Political Machine 2028 3 years down the line. But...
Alright, you should probably shut the fuck up before I eat your ass.
In conclusion, I think I've spoken my piece on these two games. Until I made this video, it had been a while since I'd played PollMac 2020, so it was nice to hop back into these two games. It's been a nice change of pace talking about something other than Hearts of Iron 4, as much as I enjoy blathering about it. Now, if you wish to play either of these games, I have some bad news for you. PollMac 2020 is off sale, probably for good, on Steam, and 2024 does ask a pretty Jackson if you're in the States. So, yeah, you'll just have to take my word on all of what PollMac 2020 had to offer. And, just a funny side note, PollMac 2020 is so far the only game in my Steam library I've 100%ed, as little as that's worth.
Can you tell I'm running out of ideas on what to say?
But that'll about do it for this video. I hope to incorporate a couple other games into the video lineup on this channel, alongside the Way 4 stuff, of course. But if you've any thoughts or anything you wish to say, within reason, there's a comment section waiting for you down below. They get lonely sometimes, you know? And remember, to drink your water and stop falling over. For those of you listening, that would be the people who live next to me, banging on the wall for whatever fucking reason.